Thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
I'm back.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I was at Disney World playing hooky, but it was good. I had a great time. It was a girls' weekend, and we were celebrating. One of my good friends is eloping, so it was a surprise trip and much needed adult time. It was like really weird and different being in public places with no children to corral. So I enjoyed myself. So thank you for pulling the weight and getting the episode done.
Well, we did our best without you, but you were sorely missed. And you are the holy glue, the guts of this gang.
Thank you. But I did listen, and I have to give you credit because not only was it engaging, it was entertaining. So I feel like you guys balanced the humor side really well, especially at the end of the episode. And I was grateful for that because it made me laugh.
We had humor.
Yeah. Surprise.
I'm not funny.
I know, no, you're hilarious when you want to be. But Gina, it looks like you hit the ground running when you got back and started going knee deep, chin deep, 6 feet deep into Genesis 37. My goodness, I don't know how many of you guys follow us on social media, but Gina did a little snippet of the notes that she was writing for this episode. And this is easily 3 times bigger than that. And it was already ridiculous. This is enormous.
I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. But it's funny because at the end of the last episode, Cody mused, I wonder what things we'll find in 37. This is a fairly well-known story. Everybody knows the story of Joseph. It doesn't matter how well churched you are, how little churched you are. Everybody knows the story of David and Goliath. Everyone knows the story of Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Yes, thanks to the Joseph musical and movies and many TV series and King of Dreams.
Yeah, that's the lesser known version. Everybody loves Prince of Egypt. Not as many people have watched or love Joseph, King of Dreams. It's good, not nearly as good as Moses.
Yeah, don't go in with the expectations of Prince of Egypt.
No.
Also,
you will be disappointed.
There are some biblical inaccuracies in the movie.
Naturally.
Yet, to be fair, Moses and Ramses didn't demolish a sphinx and cause the nose to fall.
That's exactly why it doesn't have a nose today.
I didn't realize that.
When they write, like it's still there to this day in the Bible, it's stuff like that they're talking about.
Thank you for clearing that up. I actually had no clue.
That's hilarious. Anyway, I wanted to briefly share my madness with the outline and maybe if you're listening and you're like, okay, you guys talk about the outline every episode, I'd really like access to the outline. If that's something that you want, I will happily email it to you. Just send us a message somehow, some way. But my way of studying for our episodes is like my way of doing a Bible study. So I figured I would share how I do it and then we can jump in. But basically I read the chapter, and as I'm reading the chapter in the order of verses, I add anything that stands out to me and any questions that I have in chronological order as I'm reading. And then I go back and read it again, and I answer all of those questions to the best of my ability. And I talk to Cody and I talk to Ben, and sometimes I'll talk to other people depending on their area of expertise and competence. And then that is my foundation for outlining and Bible study in general. And then we join up together in the outline because it's like a shared document, and the guys will add their own side of things. And so sometimes it can get really chaotic and really full, but we end up with these super dynamic episodes because of it. That is the method to the madness.
But it is interesting that this is easily the longest outline that you've produced, I think, on any episode.
Could be.
Top 5 at the very least. And it's interesting that it would be on this story of all the stories, because like I said, everybody knows this story. Like my first exposure to this story that I really remember was Adventures in Odyssey. I don't know how many people grew up with the Focus on the Family radio theater stuff, but I loved the Bernard Walton story from back in the day, where he told the whole story of Joseph from beginning to end, and it was amazing, very well acted, and it's been in everything. It's been pop culture, Andrew Lloyd Webber and movies and all sorts of stuff. It's all over the place. You can't find a single person who doesn't know the story of Joseph. So how could we find so much, especially at the very beginning of this story?
I loved the story of Joseph because there's a lot of reasons, but when I was like 7, one of the very first plays that I ever performed in was Joseph. It was Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And I was just like a little kid, so I did their chorus stuff. I wasn't like a character, but it's just always stuck with me because I wasn't a Christian back then. So it was like, what is this wonderful story of mystical dreams? And I don't know, like I've always just felt a connection to Joseph because of that. And then also, like Joseph has to rebuild his whole life as a man. It's nothing like what he thought it would be. And I think that felt miraculous to me as I studied it as a new Christian. So I love this story, and I love Cody's take on this story, especially because he brings up some ideas that I've never thought of before, and it's humbling. So as the chapter begins, this is Genesis 37, and I'm going to read from the English Standard Version. Jacob lived in the land of his fathers, sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. So even just right there in that first little bit, we get this like genealogy lesson again, question mark, because our last episode was about genealogy. So why are we starting out like this? And then it jumps into something that's not a genealogy. That stood out to me.
Yeah, so this is like a literary like function. It goes, the last chapter leads with this and then goes into the actual genealogies with a little bit of narrative. And then this one leads with, these are the generations of Jacob, but this is like the author basically hinging it on this is what happens to this tribe, and important narratives following that of what's going on with this specific lineage.
And there's a word for that.
Yeah, it's a toledot.
Yeah. Apparently, unbeknownst to me, and I'm 37 chapters in, there is a literary formula. It's just amazing when you dig into the language and is it the turns of phrase? You have a word for it.
Idioms?
Yeah, the idioms of the Hebrew language. Like what we interpret as, this is going to tell me the genealogy all over again. No, actually, it's going to tell me a story, and it's this hinge. But I liked the way that the Midrash described it, because it says, whatever happened to Jacob is what happened to Joseph. So Joseph embodies the representative of his generation, which we see play out today because his story is by far the most popular out of all of the brothers. So
it's interesting that it takes that route, because he's not the one who leads the covenantal line, but it's interesting to see that from the Midrash,
takes that route.
A rabbinic approach that is not covenantal.
Yes. So Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. There's a lot here.
What we often see with the common portrayals, like the pop culture portrayal, musical portrayal, most versions of Joseph we get to see is that Joseph is pure as the driven snow. Like he's almost too pure for this world. He never makes any mistakes. And in many ways that makes him the perfect protagonist for movie depictions or radio depictions or whatever, because he's not an intimidating figure. He's not complicated.
He's so wholesome.
Yeah, he's very wholesome. And unlike the previous guys who were flawed, like Isaac, there's not a whole lot that happens with him except the nearly being sacrificed thing, which would be difficult to put to camera. But like Abraham, very complicated. And Jacob, very complicated. But Joseph, what happens to him is harrowing, but he doesn't seem to be that flawed. However, I think we talked a lot about this before the podcast recording. And I think we're all more or less on the same page that in chapter 37, we're shown that Joseph is actually a very proud person. There's more behind that we'll get to in a second. But already we're starting to see some of that emerge. where just here where it talks about giving a bad report. Now, that's not necessarily something that a proud, arrogant person would do. But Targum Onkelos says it's not just one report. It's that it's multiple reports. Joseph was repeatedly coming to Jacob and giving bad reports about his brothers. And everyone was already aware of the fact that Joseph is the favored child. Jacob made no attempt to hide this.
Yeah. And it's interesting because for me, like, and thinking in this century, like if a child's mother passes away, then her immediate relatives outside of the father would take the child to raise them. And that's not what we see happening for Joseph. So instead of his aunt taking him and raising him with her children, we see the concubines, like the servants, taking him. And I think that's notable because there are a couple of explanations as to why it happened that way. But I see this like pattern with Leah and just the nation of Israel and their inability to acknowledge God's grace and mercy on them, because Leah had many opportunities where God blessed her because she was unloved. But we don't see really or hear of any real acts of humility here. This is a child whose mother died. The father is grieving, but also on this covenantal journey. There's lots and lots of children running around. And it just seems to me like a really strange occurrence that Joseph wouldn't be raised by Leah, especially because Leah was the first wife. Leah's son is the firstborn son to Jacob. So like she would have a higher status, and for him to be the favored son being raised by the lower status wives is strange.
Very much. And you can make speculations in the text and your conjecture, but we don't hear a lot about Leah going forward. Like she's played out her narrative in biblical texts. You hear a little bit about her towards the end of her life and when she's buried, but she's played that out. But with Joseph being the favorite, you can see it at play of the passion that she had against Rachel or with Rachel in the butting heads is still alive and active with Jacob actively pursuing Joseph as his favorite. And she has the firstborn, the one who should rightly inherit everything. Jacob is pursuing the firstborn of the wife that he loved more.
It's just another one of those examples of God's kind of use of weird family dynamics where an unexpected person becomes the inheritor or the favorite. Joseph is usurping the birth order, basically. And I think Leah is probably very upset about that, just reading into the conflict over the years.
Her sister had reinforced over and over the fact that she was at odds with her. Like they didn't have a good relationship. Maybe they did before getting married to the same man, but once they were both married to Jacob, then suddenly they were competing with one another constantly. And even their children were brought into it. The mandrakes.
Yeah.
That whole incident. Give me your son's mandrakes.
With sweet little Reuben.
Yeah, poor kid. And so we're shown even the kids were dragged into it. Not in a horrendous way, but it's clear that they were getting shots at each other through their children. And so I do think that it would have definitely been difficult for Leah to take Joseph under her wing. And Benjamin as well. I don't think we're ever told who ends up helping to raise Benjamin.
No, but at the end of this narrative that Jacob has clung to him more than the rest of them still. He's Jacob's favorite. Like the brothers basically say, we've lost Joseph already. Don't let us kill our father's only last living son that he loves.
So there were a few other things in this little paragraph that I thought were interesting. One, he's 17 and he's pasturing the flock with his brothers. He's taken on this role of maybe a shepherd or like some sort of helper, but it doesn't seem like he's got a leadership position even at 17. And I think it's interesting because Levi and Simeon at 13 and 15 respectively, like they were off being warriors, killing entire villages of men. Meanwhile, we have a boy in a rainbow coat with a couple of animals in a field.
It seems pretty clear to me that Jacob is giving him the treatment that he got when he was a kid. It seems like he's being kept in the tents, being a person of learning just like he was. And we're not really told that he does much shepherding until he ends up with Laban. Like he probably did some, he was probably educated, and he probably did some measure of animal husbandry, something. But we're not really shown that he is active. And I would argue that's probably what's happening with Joseph as well. And that probably breeds even more content between him and his brothers, because his brothers are working very hard. We'll see they're actually traveling great distances to work with the flocks at this point.
Yeah. Days and days of walking.
Yes.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Joseph gets to stay home, and he's only really sent out basically to spy on and tattle on his brothers. And that's about it. It seems like that's his one and only job, to go out every once in a while and then come back. Because we're shown, like we're about to get into it, but he gets a very nice gift from his father and he's always wearing it. That's not something you would wear if you were constantly active around dirty, gross sheep and goats.
So the bad report. Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. He told on his brothers. This is the beginning of a pattern of that type of behavior. It does not ingratiate him to his brothers.
Not at all.
So my question was, from the young age, was this the dynamic that Jacob encouraged? Or is this something that Joseph just did and his father ended up seeing it as a strength? I'm curious about that, because if it's something his father taught him versus something that he was just an annoying little brother about, I think there's a big difference there in the character of Joseph. And I know that the Bible doesn't explicitly tell us, but that's something I wonder.
I think you can reasonably come to that conclusion with the coat that Jacob gives him, because we'll read that in a second, but it is, you have this coat that's this priestly order. You're not a servant. You mean something. Like, we're going to clothe you in this royal garment and this is your status. And Jacob is promoting that mentality, this kind of God complex that Joseph has in this chapter here that'll play out later.
Yeah. I just get the nah, 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 nah.
I think it is both Joseph's nature, his personality, but it's also because of his father. I think that if he had been raised the same way as his other sons were, if he was raised together with them, working with them, putting in the hard work, I don't think it would have mattered so much that he was the favorite, but he's being treated in a very specific way, and it seems to be going to his head. Now, we do eventually see that Benjamin becomes the favorite after Joseph, and we'll get into that later.
I think yeah.
But Benjamin is treated very differently from Joseph by the other brothers. They don't seem to have any problem with Benjamin at all. And so we can't put it entirely on Jacob. Some of the fault does lie with Joseph, but I don't think the character flaw comes out of nowhere.
So what the heck, man? Like, Joseph is the most loved because he is the son of Jacob's old age. But what about Benjamin? Cody explained it really simply.
Yeah, he's the firstborn of the wife that he loved. So, like, naturally, like, if he's going purely by his and what the Genesis narrative has built up thus far is like Rachel's the one that he loved more. And this is the firstborn from that wife. So it is probably who he has in mind of being the firstborn, the one that's going to carry on the lineage, the one that is most like him and he's drawn to just because it is what he wants. This is what he wanted. If he got the wife that he wanted when he wanted, Joseph would be the firstborn.
He is a miracle child.
There's one other potential explanation for this, and it's much more sad, which is that Benjamin's birth did kill his favorite wife. Now, it seems from his renaming of him to Benjamin from Benoni that he doesn't want that to be held over his son for the rest of his life. He didn't want that to be the thing that defined him. But I'm sure that it did take an impact on, it did take a toll on him, the fact that he lost his wife from this pregnancy. Now, I don't know how much that influenced his favoritism, because eventually he does make him his favorite anyway when he thinks that Joseph is dead. But I struggle to say that it has no impact on this at all.
Yeah, no, it's so complex. Having that many children, that many wives, Laban did not do right by him to begin with. And like Cody said, he probably did think a lot about the what ifs, like this would be but then you also are the reason. And I know historically that was something that children did feel shame and guilt for, especially during like Victorian and medieval times. If you were born and your mother died, that was like a taboo, like sad, grievy thing. And a lot of stories exist of people, like fathers resenting the child because they are that totem of the person who died that they cared for. So I see that. And it's definitely a bummer. So the jacket that he gave him, the coat, the robe, there are many words used for this garment, but this garment is many colors. Is this significant? What do the many colors mean? Was it rainbow? And if it was rainbow, does that connect to Noah? Do we know more about the coat extra biblically? There's a lot of questions I have.
Yeah, so there's a lot, just like every covering or significant item, there's a lot of extra biblical. Some Jewish tradition connects this again to Adam's garments and the dominion that Adam had is now being placed on him. And you saw that with Jacob and the furs, but that wasn't described as a rainbow coat. So it's hard for me to follow this same logic.
But this isn't described as a rainbow coat.
Of many colors.
Yeah. Rainbow, we use rainbow interchangeably, but they didn't. And I think if it had that significance, then it would say rainbow.
Oh, yeah. If it was connected to Noah, maybe. The rainbow signifies the covenant of God not flooding the earth.
Right.
So what does that have to do with a coat and Joseph?
That's why I'm saying it doesn't.
Yeah, I believe the word here, pasim, just means multiple colors.
So it could have been purple and green.
Yeah. But the fact that it's colors is very important because making garments with colors was very expensive and very difficult. Making it just one color would have been very difficult because you need dyes for that. And dyes, depending on the color, were very difficult to get. Sometimes you lucked out and there were certain colors that you could manage to get just by grinding up plant material and stuff. But other types of colors, like purple, if it was purple, there was really only one way. The Romans were very famous for getting their certain types of purple garments, and that required an aquatic mussel, I think, some kind of mussel with which they could create dye from. And there was only one kind that you could use for that. So colors were difficult to do. You had to dye the thread and you had to get the right stuff that would cling to it permanently. Weaving one color would have been hard. Multiple colors was very difficult and very expensive. This is basically a once-in-a-lifetime gift for an entire generation of people. Not many people would have gotten this kind of thing.
And it's not just a little blazer. This was a floor-length, long-sleeve deal.
Yeah, it's, from what I see, it's a ketanet, which would be a robe. It's meant to be long. So it's not just a jacket. This was meant to be, this is long, so a lot of material. It's expensive, meaning the material itself was very costly, and it's multiple types of an expensive material. And what's more, because it's a robe, you're not supposed to wear it. If he's wearing it, you're not getting dirty.
No.
It's a signifier of the fact that your job is not to get dirty.
You're royalty. You're very special.
Status, wealth,
Yeah.
There's archaeological finds that depict that outside of Jacob's line.
Yeah. Just in ancient Near East culture, the pictures of people wearing robes like this that were colorful too are people in power, people in authority, people who don't work for a living. So that's important. I do think it's really interesting, the diversity in the descriptions based on some of the different documents that exist. So the Septuagint says that it was embroidered with many colors, not that it was patchwork, how we've seen it depicted. Targum Onkelos calls it a coat of fine wool. So we know that it would have been precious to make and expensive. Pseudo Jonathan calls it a coat embroidered with images depicting the history of the world.
Of course, Pseudo Jonathan says that.
I know. So generic. Midrash Rabbah claims the coat was passed down generationally from Adam, with some connecting it to Nimrod's garments of dominion. And then Jewish mysticism connects all of the different colors to all of the different tribes.
Yeah, Kabbalah's weird.
Yeah.
Very.
There's so much. And we have the movies that kind of give us the idea, but it's very difficult to imagine what it would really looked like.
Probably a lot duller than what you're imagining, though.
Yeah.
Dyes were not that great back then.
I'm imagining red and orange and yellow and brown and maybe some blue.
Yeah, regardless of how many colors or the types of colors, the point is that for this generation, this people, this time with the money and technology they had, this was significant. And it was meant to be a declaration that Joseph was unique. He wasn't meant to do any menial labor. He was above everyone else. He was important.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is like the Asian cultures and the long, fine metal pinky nail placement that they had.
So, verse 5. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. So why does he say behold so many times?
As we talked about before, hine is an accentuator. It's meant to point to the fact what you're saying or doing or pointing to is very important. You're trying to call attention to it. And the fact that he does this so many times, one, it's meant to stress that he believes this is a divine prophetic dream. But also, I think it's bragging. I think he's really showing off to his brothers, one, after getting this coat, but now he's getting these dreams, and it's, oh my goodness, dude, I'm so important. Look at the dreams I'm getting. What could it possibly mean? I know what it means. I bet you know what it means. And then, yeah, immediately they're like, no, we totally know what this means.
Yes. I think, so the way that I imagine it, which maybe is bad to imagine stuff, but I have to assume that he would have been excited. Like, he clearly has an inflated sense of self because his father has raised him that way. And in some respect, he really can't help it because that's just the way that he was brought up. But to have a dream that feels so meaningful and to be like, oh my gosh, you guys, this is crazy. Like, I can sense that like innocent, behold and behold, because he's excited and he just wants them to get on his level of wonder. And maybe he doesn't really understand what it means, or I don't know, he's just excited to share and then maybe realizes after the fact, oh, that probably wasn't the nicest thing to share. I don't know.
Maybe, but then when he gets the second dream, like we can definitely take that position for the first dream.
Right.
When it happens again,
It's hard for me to take that position with him, especially with the author of Genesis building this up. We learn that he's a tattletale, like him and his brothers don't have a good relationship. Then we have Jacob or Israel loved Joseph more than all the others. If the author's depicting that, then the people living that story obviously felt that. And then you have Jacob giving just Joseph this extravagant gift that was probably multiple years' wages. Like it would have been very valuable for him to have and set a status apart for him. And now he's standing on his soapbox, telling about how he's going to lord over all of them when he already is. Like it's hard.
Well, and we were literally just told in the last verse, they couldn't speak peaceably to him, ever talk nicely to him. And he thinks that this is somehow going to make them happier with him?
Yeah, either he's the dumbest person to ever live or he's very prideful and arrogant.
I think I'm picturing him like that one rich kid in high school whose daddy bought him like a really expensive sports car.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Oh, hello, brothers. I don't know if you noticed. Father got me this amazing coat. By the way, I had this incredible dream. You're never going to believe what happens in it. You were all cutting clothes of wheat and stuff like commoners, and then your sheaves of grain all bowed to mine. I'm going to go to Daddy's for tea.
Say it like Donald Trump.
We're going to go out. We're going to cut tons of sheaves of grain. They're going to be the highest sheaves of grain. They're all going to bow to my sheaves. I would never say that. God told me in a dream. It's amazing. These incredible sheaves all bowing to mine.
Gonna make the sheaves great again.
Make sheaving great again. I don't even know what sheaving is, but it's a thing. We all do it. I would have called it farming, personally.
It's so good.
Oh, dear.
Okay. Anyway, so what do ancient traditions say about Joseph's tone here? Oh, and early church fathers. So the Genesis Rabbah. Some rabbis note that Joseph was 17 and call him a youth given to vanity or youth and frivolous one. His detailed retelling was seen as tactless and provocative, fueling his brother's jealousy. Then there's the Midrash Tankuma. I've never heard of that before.
Neither have I.
This was something that I stumbled upon, but it frames Joseph as insensitive to the effect of his words, enjoying the attention his dreams brought. Rashi says Joseph's recounting aggravated their hatred because he was bringing evil reports about them and then compounding it with these dreams, hinting at immaturity or ego, as Cody shared. Then also from the Genesis Rabbah, it compares Joseph to a person who has seen something marvelous and can't help but sharing, not boasting, but marveling at what God has revealed. So now I think we're getting into the more tender explanations of his personality instead of the critical ones.
When to be fair, it's probably a combination of all of them.
Yeah.
I don't think it's fair to completely fault Joseph for his reactions, because if we had prophetic dreams that we genuinely felt were from God, and, it was about us and our family, we'd probably be excited to share it with them too. However, it's also been established very thoroughly up to this point in a very short period of time that his brothers don't like him, and every interaction they have with him is awful. So even if he's full of this wonder and happiness, he should be very careful about the way he says this.
Dude, find a best friend. You know what? Benjamin, he's 6. It would be great. Talk to Benjamin.
Hey, buddy, guess what you're going to do eventually?
Yeah.
He would probably be like, cool, I love you.
How about you now?
Aw. So Joseph is definitely depicted as like this weird, ignorant, innocent, like not totally normal teenager because he was raised to believe that he was special. And he's living that out, but nobody really wants to celebrate that. So then his brothers reply, and they say 2 different sentences that feel a little bit redundant, but they're really not. So, are you indeed to reign over us? And then, are you indeed to rule over us? So, why repeat this? Why say it more than one time? What's the difference here? You talked to me about this.
Oh, yeah. It's like an A&E thing. Cultures in the ancient Near East, like it's a kingship rebuttal. That more in the next dream with Jacob and the rebuttal Jacob has, but this follows a very similar, like double repeat of kingship rites and rituals and priestly rites and rituals in the A&E. So what that means is they're getting Joseph inserting himself as king here, and they're refusing it in a cultural context of the double repetitive phrase.
I like it.
You also see a lot in books like Proverbs. A repetition of 2 is a part of poetry, and it ties into the semi-poetic nature of Genesis generally. It's meant to be an easy read. It's meant to be able to be understood and listened to. And so there are certain things that don't translate well into poetry in other languages, but the repetition is something that does.
Yes, and it mirrors the repetition of Joseph saying, "Behold." So they have their own version of this is their way of beholding what he's saying. And they're being repetitive in doing so. But it does mean 2 separate things. And I think they're saying not only will you not reign over us being our king, but you won't rule over us either. You don't tell us what to do. And I think that's like their way of checking his reality. So they hate him even more. And then we go on to verse 9 because there's a second dream. So then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So there's so many different pieces here that kind of drive me up a wall because they don't line up. They don't make sense. You've got another dream now with celestial bodies. His father is now rebuking him for it. He's talking about Rachel, who's dead. There's just so many pieces that, for me, are confusing about this dream.
Yeah, this one was much more interesting to me. Bringing in the celestial bodies. Like this is a cosmic geography. This is a cosmic mentality here. It means more than just earthly. Like we see in other parts of the Bible, Nebuchadnezzar gets very worldly dreams, the dreams that Joseph ends up interpreting or Daniel ends up interpreting are very materialistic. This is in a cosmic setting. So has a greater impact. And I think that's why you see the rebuttal from Jacob that you do, or the rebuke from Jacob that you do, is that this means a lot more than the last one for sure.
I think the first dream can be taken prophetically in terms of what happens in Egypt with the brothers and the fact that he feeds them. But this dream is harder to draw those conclusions because you have to either take it in a like Christological context, or you have to try to interpret the dream in a different way. I think it's very challenging to know exactly what this dream means. And I think it's prideful on one hand for the family to care as much as they do about who is in charge and what their status is. But then also, like, Jacob is so scared of his own kids that he's not even able to listen to this dream. And he had dreams from God himself. Like, he knows what the magnitude is behind communicating with God. And yet he's, no, what are you talking about?
So as far as the interpretation, like way back in the day, this should actually be something that is much more assuring to Jacob than it is. In fact, I would argue that this was an opportunity for Joseph to be able to elevate his family, to elevate his brothers, elevate his parents, but it doesn't end up being that way. And I think this is actually one of the reasons why Jacob, after this whole incident and taken some time to cool down, it says that he kept this in his mind. He kept thinking about it. So it meant something to him, but not so much to his brothers. So back in the time of Abraham, God said, look up at the sky. I shall number your descendants greater than the stars in the sky, than the sands in the sea. And that was meant to be very meaningful, not just tying his people to the stars, to saying that you are going to be my children, basically. Because stars were very meaningful in the A&E culture. That's basically gods. Not saying that your children are going to be gods, though you can argue one of them was God himself. And so that was potentially being hinted at with that interaction with Abraham.
Yeah, and there's a good paper by David Burnett on that, the qualitative and quantitative meaning behind I will make you like the stars in the heavens.
But we're seeing another reiteration of that. That's what I would argue is happening here, that Joseph is being shown, again, the promise of God. This isn't just a promise for Joseph. It's a promise for Israel, for Leah, and also for his brothers. They're going to see this promise start to be fulfilled in his generation. But that's not what he ends up communicating to them. That's not how they take it. They don't take it as, this is a promise for you as much as for me. You guys are the stars in the sky. You guys are the sun and moon. If you were to be told you were in a dream, someone's star in the sky, that just by itself is elevating. But contextually, this is an echo of a promise from God. And Joseph has an opportunity to say, this is a promise for you. This is what you will be. But no, it's, you bowed to me. And that was everyone's takeaway.
And I think, like, when we look at dreams in the Bible and like the interpretation of them, God is the one that's assisting in the interpretation. And we don't see that here. There's like a lot of emotion that pops up. And I think fear from Israel, but then also anger from the brothers and cluelessness from Joseph. And they're so distracted that they don't even turn to the Lord. There's no mention of them like praying to discern what it meant or processing it. Or you hear at the very end that Jacob keeps it in mind, but there's no involvement with God. And that's not the relationship Israel had historically with God. So you can tell in a way that they've taken their eye off the prize. They're elevating themselves and they're not making God the main character.
We also don't hear a ton of instances going forward of Jacob having interactions with God. He does give blessings. He's not divorced from God's presence. But we don't see him interact with him in the same meaningful way. We don't hear about tons of dreams happening with him. Like he had both dreams with God and physical interactions with God. And so I imagine now seeing your son, granted your favorite son, but your son having this happen, And God didn't tell you anything about this. That might be what he's feeling. I didn't hear anything about this. Why are you being told this and not me? It's for once he's getting a sense of what his sons are getting. And that might be why he has the reaction that he does, similar to his sons.
That was something Cody and I talked about last night. It's like when your children start hearing from the Lord and you're like, he didn't tell me, so you're lying.
I would like to note that this is the first time in Genesis where the author does not specifically point to God coming to somebody in a vision or giving somebody a dream. Like even with Abimelech, like it very clearly says that God came to him in a dream. With Laban, it specifically says that God came to him in a dream. With Jacob, it specifically says that God gave him a vision. This is the first time in Genesis that it does not delineate if it was from God or not.
Yeah. So that's a great point. I think this situation is just so emotionally charged that they were doomed to fail, because also if Jacob really wanted Joseph to be elevated to this point of having the status of the coat and the not needing to work and being the favorite son, shouldn't he be happy that Joseph is having prophetic dreams that he's going to be bowed to? That's the stage that the father set. Why is he now suddenly rebuking him? Is it truly just that he's afraid?
I think it's because it involves him having to be humbled himself, that at some point in the future, he's going to bow. And that's, to be fair, that'd be hard for any of us to hear.
That would be hard. I do think the setting too, and we'll talk about this towards the end, but the setting too, I think either Joseph's not interpreting his own dream correctly, or Jacob is seeing the full implication of what this could mean in the cosmic order of things. And his knee-jerk response is, yeah, this is borderline heretical. Like, you can't talk like this.
I think just like you guys said in the last episode, Israel is continuously failing to keep God at the top. And they're all worried about who's going to be the leader, who's going to bow, who's going to lead. And it's this kind of developmental period for the Israelites, but they're not off to a good start. Like a couple of chapters ago, Rachel dies. Jacob doesn't even bother putting her in the family tomb. He's on a mission for the Lord. But over the years that have passed, he's clearly gotten complacent. And it's just one of those signs that we can laugh and chuckle and make jokes like the Israelites were so stupid. But we are so guilty of that. And we have to keep God in the right spot. And especially with the significance of the sun in the dream and knowing what the sun culturally meant to the ancient Near East people, I think it's wrong for Jacob to assume that he's the son.
I think that it's correct. And to be clear, I do believe that this dream is from God. I think if it was from anyone else, it would have also been included in the narrative. Because we're also never told anywhere in Genesis that the devil or demons gave anyone dreams either.
No, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the interpretation is ambiguous. And historically, if you look at like different early church fathers and documents, there's a lot of division on what this vision actually means. And for Jacob to jump to, oh, it's just about our immediate family is wrong, because it's celestial, it's heavenly, it's greater than what's happening on the earth.
So I would argue from Revelation, there's the passage that talks about how there's the virgin and she's clothed with the sun, the moon is at her feet, and the 12 stars are above her head. There are people who interpret that to be Mary. I think it's pretty clear, especially pulling from this as a reference, it's a reference to Israel. And it's the birth of the church. So I don't think that he's wrong in interpreting himself as the sun and his wife as the moon. Now, he could potentially be wrong, but I think future verses in the New Testament pull from this as this in its entirety, the sun, moon, and stars being Israel.
I don't get it there. I think he's putting himself in the like supreme leader role instead of the Lord, and he's not as humble as he should be. Whether the interpretation itself is accurate or not, that's not really the point. To me, the point is Jacob has created this tension in his family where everybody wants to be on top. And there's so many people already. There's no possible way that all of them could be satisfied. And he could have done so many things differently. But in this dream interpretation, he elevates himself because one, he feels threatened, and two, he doesn't want even more hatred towards Joseph. And I think that's wrong. I think that like he should have humbled himself, and he didn't. And I think putting himself in the role of the son there, historically with ancient Near East gods, like he's putting himself in the position of a god.
If he didn't, then wouldn't that imply that God bows to Joseph?
No,
So who would be the son bowing to Joseph?
it would be something celestial.
Yeah. So then wouldn't the stars also be celestial?
No, because this, to me, the stars are the people. That's the promise. That's the covenant, is that they're going to outnumber the stars. Like the sun and the moon may be different. And there are different historical documents that confirm that. Now, the Bible confirms the Bible, right? So I hear what you're saying about Revelation, but looking at just the ancient historical context, I think they're interpreting it wrong. It all points to Christ, however you play with it. But I think Jacob that his intention wasn't honorable. And I think that he's failing here because of it.
Potentially.
Yeah. The weird one for me is the moon, because Rachel is past at this point. So
Yeah, I should have said that. That's part of why I'm uncomfortable with his interpretation. Why would a dead person be bowing?
It would be Leah at this point, because that's his wife. The other two women who have produced the children are his concubines, and he never considered them to be his wives.
But he says your mother.
Yeah.
And that's Rachel.
That's the only woman that he's married to at this point. That would be his stepmother.
But Rachel is dead, and he's telling Joseph, I'll read the verse again. Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? We know earlier in this chapter he's being raised by the servants, not Leah.
Correct, but those aren't his mothers. Those are
is
servants.
Leah, though.
She is technically.
Not.
Yes,
not
that's his stepmother.
Not in A&E, though. Like, they don't inherit the sons of the dead. That's not.
Leah didn't inherit him because the
it's
servants were raising him.
It's still.
Well, it says
complicated.
specifically come to, as in to arrive to physically come to. And at this point, we have to say either one, Rachel is still alive, and that could possibly be one way you interpret this, and we'll get into that later. Or it could be that because Leah is the one remaining parent, he's now adopted into sonship with her, but she doesn't want to care for him.
But that's a stretch. You don't see that.
It's less of a stretch than claiming that a dead person bows to him.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, if he's interpreting it because he's so attached to Rachel, and he's treating Joseph special because he is her son, and he's referring to your mother, and the language is not stepmother. It's not an alternate word in Hebrew. It's mother. It would be Rachel.
Yeah, and they were just listed as wives before, not concubines. So they would, like, just in this verse or chapter, like the same status as Leah would have been.
Yeah, but we know from the previous chapters he didn't view them as that way. They were there to provide surrogate children for their masters. Like, by that reasoning, these should have been their personal children, not count as children towards their masters. So they weren't full wives in the same sense of Leah and Rachel.
No, and Jacob definitely agrees with that.
Yeah.
But he says mother here. And that, to me, and a lot of people, scholarly people, it's Rachel that he's talking about.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know the Hebrew. Like, I would assume it's a possessive of Joseph if he's responding to
let's
Joseph.
play with it for a minute.
I know in A&E culture, the other wives did not inherit the sons if they died.
This is an instance where this is the sister, too.
Yeah, I don't know. It again, even if they were concubines, we know that it is them that is raising Joseph, not Leah. Like, Leah is completely void from this conversation in this chapter, so it's hard for me to think that would be a connection that Jacob is making.
I would sooner see that than say that somehow he's referencing his blood mother, but that she's dead, so...
I still see it as the blood mother and Jacob, but because it's a cosmic and it's not an earthly thing. Like, she can be passed and it doesn't matter. Like, this is celestial bodies. This is way out of context of material.
Unless it's specifically trying to be a callback to the promise of Abraham, in which case it's not truly cosmic, it's not supernatural, it's a callback to the imagery that God used, because God wasn't saying that all of your children would be cosmic gods or anything supernatural. He was just calling, like you said, to the quality and quantity.
Quantifiably, yeah. So he was calling them gods, like you will become like the angels, so to speak.
In a sense, but it's kinship to God, but not on a celestial level, not as in like the angels.
I would disagree.
So they became spirits that were capable of, they had skin like bronze.
We will rule over the angels at one point. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's way in the future.
I would say this is future because it's cosmic talk. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Like, it's not here and now.
It's not a hill I want to die on, but the word is like Ema. It's just a traditional word for mother. And we can break it down into different authors and church fathers, but ultimately, most of them accept your mother. Like the way that a father would talk about your mother, whether she was here or not, like symbolically, even if it wasn't literally. But the beliefs on the afterlife were confusing to me in the Old Testament compared to the New Testament. And so I don't know what Jacob really believed other than that he knew about Sheol.
He talks about it at the end. It's fun.
It's always fun when people talk about Sheol.
Moving on, let's chat for a second about the last sentence, but his father kept the saying in mind. So is this a literary turn of phrase, Cody? Because you looked this up.
So the closest thing that stuck out to me in this is in Luke. Luke depicts like Mary remembering stuff in her heart or taking up something in her heart. And it seems just like a turn of phrase, like he's keeping it close, because there is some tradition that has Jacob's rebuttal being purely to protect Joseph. And he's, oh yeah, this is going to happen. I believe this of my son. I'm going to keep it close to me, keep it with me. I don't know if I buy that, but that is what stuck out to me. Is it seems like a more Semitic or Hebrew turn of phrase.
Yeah, it literally is. Literally translated, it means his father guarded the word. So he kept it in his heart. So I think that's sweet, especially knowing what's about to happen.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.